My friends, let us come together for a few moments of quiet recognition, for we are not here merely to discuss spiritual principles, nor to gather more ideas for the mind to store. We are here to behold truth, to rest in the awareness of God as the only presence and the only power. And in that sacred atmosphere, let us consider something that touches every sincere seeker of the spiritual life. There are times along this path when you have been faithful. You have prayed when no one knew you were praying. You have forgiven when everything in you wanted to remember the hurt. You have walked forward when the world gave you every reason to retreat. And yet, even with all your faithfulness, you have carried a burden that would not lift, a wound that remained tender, a memory that refused to release its hold. You have said, I have forgiven. And still, the heart trembled in the presence of the one who caused the pain. You have said, I let it go, and yet some shadow lingered. It is not because you lack goodness. It is not because you lack spiritual devotion. It is simply that you have been taught to forgive at the level of the human self. You have been taught to forgive as a person addressing another person. And as long as forgiveness operates at that level, it never completes itself. It remains an effort, a struggle, a repeated task. It becomes an emotional labor rather than a spiritual realization. But today we are going to rise above that personal sense. We shall look beyond the tired effort of the human mind and behold what Jesus knew, what the great mystics knew, and what I have witnessed again and again in the lives of those who turned within, that true forgiveness is not a human act at all. It is the recognition that in the presence of God, in the reality of spirit, nothing has occurred that requires forgiveness. The hurt was an appearance in material sense, not an activity in divine consciousness. For a moment, rest in that. Do not analyze it. Simply allow the truth to settle gently upon your awareness. Let the heart feel what the mind cannot grasp. Because when you perceive life from the standpoint of the one who is living you, you discover that your faithfulness has never been in vain. You were not enduring hardship alone. You were being prepared for spiritual vision, for the ability to see as God sees. And so, beloved, we begin, not with strain, not with the attempt to change the past, but with a quiet willingness to behold the world through another lens, the lens of the kingdom, where only God is power, and where the shadows of the human story lose their seeming reality in the light of truth. As we move deeper into this truth, let us gently examine why so many sincere attempts at forgiveness leave us unchanged, why the wound still aches, why the memory still stirs, why the heart still tightens in the presence of the one who brought pain. It is not because forgiveness is impossible. It is because the forgiveness we have been taught belongs entirely to the realm of personal sense, and personal sense has no capacity to touch spiritual reality. When you and I attempt to forgive as persons, we are accepting a duality that does not exist in the kingdom of God. We are accepting the premise that there is a me who has been wronged and a they who have done wrong, two powers, two lives, two wills, two natures at odds with each other. The moment we accept that duality, we step out of the harmony of spiritual truth and into the conflict of human belief. And in that atmosphere, forgiveness becomes an effort, and efforts of the human mind can never reach the peace of the spirit. Observe carefully what happens inside you when you try to forgive from the level of personality. You may speak words of release, you may pray with earnestness, yet within the heart there remains a subtle claim. This person has harmed me. Something real has occurred. Something substantial must be undone. As long as that claim is present, forgiveness cannot complete itself, because the mind is still holding the injury as real, still assigning power to the action, still seeing the offender as a separate self acting against your separate self. But my friends, in the spiritual universe of God, This is not so. There are not two selves, one doing wrong and one being wronged. There is only one self expressing as infinite form, only one life living itself through the many, only one presence appearing as all that is. And until consciousness rises into this recognition, forgiveness remains an endless task, something we repeat when the memory returns, something we reaffirm when the anger resurfaces. We find ourselves forgiving again and again because the illusion of separation has not yet been dissolved. The human mind believes forgiveness means loosening the grip of a painful story. But spiritual forgiveness is not the mellowing of memory. It is not a softening of resentment. It is the dissolution of the entire premise upon which resentment exists. For resentment is born only when we believe that someone other than God has power, power to wound, power to diminish, power to interrupt the harmony of our being. Let us be honest inwardly. As long as we believe a person has power over our peace, forgiveness remains a fragile achievement. It can be undone by the next memory, the next encounter, the next word. This is why personal sense forgiveness fails, because it tries to build spiritual healing on a foundation of human perception. But listen, when the foundation shifts, the entire structure changes. When you recognize that nothing and no one has authority over your life but the one presence, when you realize that the action which seemed to injure you belonged only to the realm of human ignorance, not to the realm of spirit, then forgiveness is not something you perform. It is something that happens as naturally as light dispelling darkness. And so we see that personal sense forgiveness fails, not because we lack virtue, but because we have attempted to do a spiritual work with a human tool. The human mind cannot forgive in the way the spirit forgives, because the spirit does not behold a separate self to condemn or absolve. It sees only God, only harmony, only the unbroken flow of divine life. When we rise to that vision, forgiveness ceases to be a duty and becomes a realization. There is nothing to forgive, for in the presence of God, nothing real has been violated. And now, let us come to the heart of this teaching, the point at which many recoil at first, and yet, when understood, brings the greatest liberation a human soul can ever know. It is the revelation upon which much of my work rests, the realization that dissolves burdens which years of emotional labor could not erase. It is simply this: in the presence of God and the truth of spiritual being, there is nothing to forgive. Do not rush past this. Do not attempt to grasp it with intellect. Let it enter gently, as a whisper of the Spirit. For this is not a statement of sentiment, nor a denial of human experience. It is a recognition of spiritual reality, a reality that transcends the shifting appearances of the material sense. You see, my friends, all that you have ever attempted to forgive belong to the realm of the human picture, where individuals act from fear, from ignorance, from the false belief that they are separate from the source of their being. Their words, their choices, their failures arose not from an evil nature, but from a limited sense of self, from a mistaken identity. And here is the mystery. That mistaken identity is the only thing that acted. Not the divine self, not the spiritual reality of the individual, only the mask, the illusion, the dream image moved. The spirit within them never acted against you. The spirit within you was never touched. When you understand this, forgiveness is no longer the attempt to free yourself from someone who has wronged you. It becomes the dawning realization that no one in their true identity ever wronged you at all. The part of them that acted was not the child of God, not the expression of the infinite, but the flickering shadow cast by the belief in separation. Let us take this slowly. For understanding, it changes the entire landscape of your life. If God is the only presence, if God is the only power, if God is the only life, then whatever appears to injure, to offend, to disappoint can have no spiritual substance. It exists only as a picture on the screen of human thought, and when that picture is recognized for what it is, it dissolves. Not forgotten, dissolved. Not suppressed, revealed as unreal. This is why Jesus could say, with perfect clarity, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." It was not a moral plea, it was a spiritual perception. He saw that the actions of human consciousness do not belong to the realm of God. He saw that their true nature remained untouched, unfallen, unmarred, and from that vision came effortless forgiveness, not as a gesture, but as a fact of spiritual sight. When you begin to see as Christ saw, you will understand what I mean. Forgiveness is not the work of making peace with the past. It is the unveiling of a truth that was always present. In the kingdom of God, nothing real was harmed, and nothing real can harm. You discover then that forgiveness is not an action you initiate, it is a light you behold. It is not an effort you perform, it is an awakening within you. It is not the loosening of chains, it is the realization that the chains were made of smoke and vanished the moment you reached for them. And so, when I say there is nothing to forgive, I do not ask you to ignore your memories or invalidate your feelings. I invite you instead to rise above the dream level of the experience and behold the truth. Only human illusion acted, and illusion has no power over the life of God expressing as you. When that truth dawns, forgiveness happens of its own accord. It unfolds as naturally as sunrise dissolving night, and the heart, long burdened, long suffering, suddenly stands free, not because you forced yourself to release another, but because you have awakened to the one presence in whom no harm can exist. Let us turn now to a matter of great importance. For even after hearing that in spiritual truth there is nothing to forgive, the mind will insist upon holding to its grievances. It will say, yes, but the pain was real, the memory is real, the injustice did happen, and it is here in this subtle persistence that we discover the invisible chain that binds us to the past. Understand this well. A grievance does not bind you because of what another person has done. A grievance binds you because you continue to grant reality to the appearance. You continue to feed life into an image that has no true existence. Each time you revisit the memory, each time you rehearse the story, each time you allow the emotion to rise, you breathe fresh vitality into something that is spiritually powerless. And so it lingers not because it is strong, but because you believe it to be so. It is not the grievance itself that holds you captive. It is your recognition of it that gives it seeming substance. You see, my friends, the mind believes that by remembering the hurt, it is protecting you. It believes that by keeping the story alive, it is preventing future injury. But spiritual truth reveals something quite different. Every time you clutch a grievance, you anchor yourself to the plane of human sense, where fear, conflict, and duality reign. You step out of the kingdom consciousness and back into the world of opposites, good and evil, right and wrong, offender and offended. This is the chain. This is the bondage, not the event, but your identification with the event. Now, listen very gently within yourself. Notice that when the memory arises, it does not arise as a present fact. It arises as an image in thought. The person is not here. The circumstance is not here. Only the mental picture is here, animated by your attention. And yet we respond to that picture as if it were happening again, as if it were a living force operating upon us. This is the illusion of separation at work, the belief that something other than God has power over our peace. But I say to you, When you recognize that the grievance is nothing more than a mental shadow without spiritual foundation, you begin to feel the chain loosen. The past loses its authority. The hurt loses its weight. The memory fades, not because the mind decides to forget, but because consciousness ceases to affirm its reality. You are not healing the past. You are awakening from the belief that the past has spiritual existence. Grievances are the residue of believing that life is happening to you from the outside world. But when you come into the awareness of the One Presence, you see that life is unfolding through you from the center of divine being, not from external persons or events. And here is the miracle. When you refuse to feed the grievance with fresh thought, fresh emotion, fresh story, when you simply rest in the truth that God alone is power, the grievance collapses like a structure without support. It dissolves because it never had substance in the first place. Let this truth settle deeply. What binds you is not the memory of what happened, but the belief that it had power over the reality of your being. Release that belief, and you release the past, and you step into the kingdom. Step into the kingdom, and you discover freedom not as an achievement, but as the nature of your own spiritual identity. Now, my friends, let us approach the turning point of this entire work, one of the great secrets of spiritual healing, and one of the deepest principles in all of practical mysticism. For up to this moment we have spoken of the unreality of the grievance and the powerlessness of the past, but now we must look more closely at the one whom you believe caused the hurt. This is where transformation truly begins. In personal sense, you see the offender only as their behavior. You see their failure, their harsh word, their betrayal, their indifference, their fear, their woundedness acting out through them. And because you see only the outer act, you react to the outer act. You try to forgive a behavior, a personality, a human expression that may indeed have been unkind, unfair, or harmful. But understand this, behavior is never the identity of a soul. Never. Behavior is the outer garment of consciousness at a certain point in its awakening. Behavior is the echo of someone living from a limited sense of themselves, unaware of the divine life that animates them. Behavior is the mask worn by a being who has forgotten who they are. And so, when you attempt to forgive the mask, you remain locked in the drama of the mask. You stay bound to the picture, to the role, to the story. But when you lift your vision, even for a moment, and perceive that behind the mask stands a spiritual being, an expression of the one infinite presence, then forgiveness begins, not with effort, but with recognition. Let us be very clear. You are not asked to condone behavior. You are not asked to approve of it or pretend it was good. You are simply invited to look past the behavior to the truth of the one who stands behind it. For behind every human limitation is the same divine self that animates you, the same life, the same light, the same presence. And when you behold that reality, you will see that the person who seemed to hurt you was acting not from malice, but from ignorance of their true identity. They knew not what they did because they knew not who they were. This seeing is the transformation. You look upon them as spirit beholds its own creation, not fallen, not broken, not guilty, but mistaken in their belief of separation. And in that moment, you are not forgiving what they did. You are recognizing what they truly are. You are shifting your vision from the level of human behavior to the level of spiritual identity. And notice what happens within you when this occurs. The heart softens, not through effort, but by the gentle dissolving of illusion. The mind becomes quiet because it can no longer maintain the story of offense. The emotions relax because the belief in another power has been withdrawn. Suddenly, you see, they could not harm you because they never possessed power apart from God. This is not idealism. This is realism, spiritual realism, the only realism there is. When you see the offender as divine identity obscured by human sense, something remarkable happens. The tension in your own heart releases. For in that moment, you are no longer interacting with their fear, their ignorance, their limitation. You are interacting with the Christ within them. And the Christ recognized calls the Christ forth. This is why Jesus could heal with a word, why the great mystics could transform lives through presence alone. They did not see sinners. They did not see villains. They did not see opponents. They saw God appearing as individual identity, even when the individual could not yet see it in themselves. My friends, to behold the Christ in another is the greatest act of forgiveness and the highest form of love. And when you do this, you will discover that forgiveness is not something you give. They awaken to it in your presence because your vision has lifted them out of the role they once played in your story. Let the mask fall. See the soul. And you will find that forgiveness has already occurred at the level where truth is known. Now that we have touched the principle in its purity, let us bring it gently into the realm of practice. For truth must become experience before it becomes freedom. It must be lived before it can transform. And so I will give you not a ritual, not an outer method, but an inner posture, a way of turning within that aligns you with the consciousness in which forgiveness unfolds effortlessly. Let us begin with the first and most vital step. 1. Pause, do nothing humanly. Whenever the memory stirs, whenever the old hurt rises like smoke, whenever anger or grief presents itself, the first movement is not action, but stillness. Do not rush to forgive. Do not attempt to change your feeling. Do not argue with the mind or suppress the emotion. Simply pause. This pause is the doorway out of personal sense. It is the moment in which you withdraw your identification from the story, from the drama, from the belief that you are the one suffering. In that pause, you step back into the awareness of the witness, the Christ within, and you allow the event to appear without agreeing that it defines you. 2. Recognize one presence, one power. In the pause, turn silently within and acknowledge the truth. God is the only presence here. Even in the memory, even in the feeling, even in the image of the offender. For the moment you acknowledge one presence, the belief in two powers begins to dissolve. The scene of injury cannot survive in the light of the one. It has no substance apart from your belief in it. This recognition need not be forceful. It need only be sincere. Whisper it inwardly. Only God is here. 3. Reframe the vision. See the spiritual identity behind the mask. Now, as the heart grows still, look upon the person in question not with the eyes of memory, but with the eyes of spirit. Recognize, even if faintly at first, that the one who acted was not their true identity. It was the human sense of them, operating from fear, from ignorance, from separation. Say within yourself, this is divine consciousness, unaware of itself. This is not the one who hurt me. This is the one who forgot who they are. This shifts the entire structure of the grievance. The person is no longer the villain in your story. They are a soul struggling in limitation, just as you have struggled many times in your own journey. 4. Release the story. Let the appearance fall away. Next, as gently as a leaf falling to the earth, allow the emotional story to loosen. Do not push it away. Do not contradict it. Do not attempt to erase it. Simply see it for what it is. an appearance in consciousness, without power, without reality, without life. Say softly, this belongs only to material sense. It has no truth in God. In that moment, the story begins to dissolve. It has been deprived of its nourishment, your belief. 5. Rest in spiritual identity for yourself and for them. Finally, turn inward to your own true self, not the wounded self, not the reacting self, but the self that has never been touched by any human event. Say quietly within, I am spiritual being, and only spiritual being is present here. Rest in this. Let it wash over you. Feel the peace that comes when the burden shifts from your shoulders to the infinite. And as you rest, notice something. Forgiveness has already taken place. Not because you did something, but because you ceased doing the thing that kept illusion alive. You did not forgive. You recognized. You did not release the offender. You saw the truth about them. You did not heal the wound. You awakened from the belief that you were injured. This is the practice of impersonal forgiveness. It is simple, but it is not shallow. It is profound, but it is not difficult. It is the gateway to freedom, because it returns you to the consciousness where God alone is power. Practice this gently, practice this consistently, and you will find that the heart, which once felt heavy, now lives in an atmosphere of quiet compassion, not because you have tried to love, but because you have realized that love is the nature of your own being. Now let us bring this truth into the living texture of human experience. For principles alone can inspire, but it is often in the quiet testimony of transformed lives that we recognize how Spirit works in the ordinary events of our days. I want to share with you the story of a woman whose journey illustrates, in the most gentle way, how the consciousness of forgiveness, true forgiveness, unfolds when we cease struggling at the human level and turn toward the kingdom within. Her name was Margaret. She came to one of my classes many years ago with a heart weighed down by a grief she could scarcely carry. Her sister, her own flesh and blood, had betrayed her trust in a business matter, costing her nearly everything she had saved from years of labor. It shook her marriage, shattered her sense of security, and left her feeling abandoned by the very person who should have stood beside her. For 3 years she tried to forgive. She prayed with earnestness. She read every book she could find on reconciliation. She confronted her sister, pleaded with her, reasoned with her, yet the anger remained. Worse still, her body began to reflect the inner strain. Chronic digestive troubles, sleepless nights, a heaviness in her chest that no physician could explain. When she sat before me, her eyes carried the fatigue of someone who had done everything she knew to do, yet remained imprisoned in the same sorrow. And so I asked her, Margaret, whom are you trying to forgive? She hesitated, surprised by the question. My sister, she said softly. Who else? But it was not the sister who had betrayed her that she was trying to forgive. It was the personality, the behavior, the human sense of her sister, the part of her sister that had acted from fear, from confusion, from belief in separation. And so long as Margaret kept her attention fixed on that human sense, she could not be free, because she was trying to reconcile truth with illusion, spirit with appearance. I told her gently, stop trying to forgive your sister. In spiritual reality, the one who betrayed you does not exist. There is only the divine identity, pure, perfect, untouched by human ignorance. Turn away from the personality and behold the Christ of her being. This was difficult for her. Her mind protested, her emotions resisted, but she agreed to practice not by forcing forgiveness, not by suppressing resentment, but by quietly turning within whenever anger surfaced and remembering the truth. God is the only presence. There is no separate self, no separate will, no separate offender in the kingdom of God. And day by day, something began to change. The anger returned, yes, but it came with less force. The hurt resurfaced, but it dissolved more quickly. And gradually, the story she had told herself, I am a victim of my sister's betrayal, lost its hold, because she no longer saw herself as a vulnerable personality. She began to see herself as spiritual being. Within 6 weeks, her digestion improved, her sleep returned, her spirit lightened, and the memory, once sharp and painful, became like a shadow fading at the edge of her awareness. Then something remarkable occurred. Her sister reached out unexpectedly, without prompting, and apologized, not from obligation, but from genuine awakening. She made partial financial restitution, yes, but more importantly, she approached Margaret not as an adversary, not as someone defending her actions, but as one who had suddenly begun to feel the presence of truth unfolding within her own heart. Now hear this clearly. It was not Margaret's effort that changed her sister. It was the atmosphere of truth in Margaret's consciousness, the refusal to hold her sister in the bondage of wrongdoer. When Margaret saw her sister's spiritual identity, she released her into the freedom of her own higher nature, and her sister responded to that call. This is the power of impersonal forgiveness. This is the quiet miracle that happens when we behold only God and nothing else behind the human appearance. It heals bodies. It restores relationships. It dissolves burdens, not because we try to change the outer picture, but because we have awakened to the reality behind the picture. My friends, what happened for Margaret can happen for you, not by repeating her steps outwardly, but by entering the same consciousness, the consciousness that sees no offender, no offense, and no separation in the kingdom of God. Let us now consider what it truly means to live without grievance, for to some this may seem like an impossible ideal, a spiritual height reserved for saints or mystics. But I tell you, living without grievance is not rare, nor is it reserved for the few. It is the natural state of one who has glimpsed the kingdom not as a place, not as a promise, but as a present reality of consciousness. When you understand that every grievance arises from the belief in two powers, you will see that to release a grievance is not to perform a moral act, it is to awaken from a dream. It is to step out of the world where persons act upon you and enter the world where God alone is presence and power. And when this realization dawns, it changes the very texture of your inner life. Let me show you what life feels like in this awareness. When you live without grievance, the heart becomes extraordinarily light, not empty, not detached, but spacious, wide enough to hold the imperfections of others without being shaken by them. You no longer react from hurt because you no longer believe in the you that can be hurt. You have begun to live from the self that is untouched by human conduct, the self that is born of God, the self that cannot be diminished. When the old triggers arise, you find that they no longer reach you in the same way. Yes, a feeling may appear momentarily like a cloud passing, but it dissolves quickly because it cannot find a place to anchor. You are no longer its host. You are the presence before which it fades. You see, once the belief in a separate self falls away, grievances have nothing to cling to. And in relationships, something beautiful happens. People who once irritated you now appear gentler. Circumstances that once felt threatening lose their power. Conversations become clearer, interactions become freer, because you are meeting others from a place of wholeness rather than need. You are no longer searching for validation nor guarding against harm. You are simply present, radiating the consciousness of truth. This is not something you strive for. It is something that unfolds as you rest in the awareness of one presence. You discover, too, that living without grievance does not make you passive. Quite the opposite. You become capable of firm boundaries, clear speech, and wise action, but without the heat of resentment, without the tremor of fear. You act from clarity, not from injury. You respond from truth, not from reaction. And because your responses are no longer conditioned by old wounds, the outcomes of your life change. You find peace where there once was conflict, ease where there once was tension, doors open. Opportunities appear. People soften in your presence, not because you are manipulating them, but because the atmosphere of your consciousness invites harmony. My friends, this is the beginning of kingdom consciousness. The kingdom of God is not a distant future, nor a reward for righteous behavior. It is the awareness of God's infinite presence here and now, the recognition that spirit is the only reality, and that all appearances of discord are shadows with no substance. When you live from this awareness, grievances lose their life. They cannot follow you into the light. And so I say to you, living without grievance is not the achievement of a spiritual athlete. It is the natural consequence of awakening to truth. When the mind ceases to manufacture stories of injury, when the heart ceases to cling to false identities, when the soul recognizes its unity with all that God is, then forgiveness becomes unnecessary. For there is nothing left to forgive. This is the freedom that awaits you. This is the peace Jesus called the peace not as the world gives. This is the atmosphere of consciousness in which your life becomes an instrument of quiet healing, blessing all who enter your presence without your ever speaking a word. And now, my friends, as we come to the close of our time together, let us gather these truths into the quiet of our hearts, not as concepts, not as lessons, but as living awareness. For the purpose of this teaching has not been to improve the human scene, nor to strengthen the human personality. Its purpose has been to lift you gently into the consciousness that stands behind the human picture, the consciousness in which God alone is power, God alone is presence, God alone is reality. You have heard today that true forgiveness is not an achievement, not a labor of will, not a moral effort to rise above resentment. True forgiveness is the realization that in the kingdom of God, no harm has occurred. The offense belonged to the realm of human sense, and human sense has no authority over the life that is lived in and by God. Let this truth become a resting place within you. When you feel the old emotions stir, remember, the one who was hurt is not your true self. The one who did the hurting is not their true self. Only the divine identity is real, and only the divine identity has life. When memories arise uninvited, do not struggle. Simply return to the presence. Return to the simple recognition. God is here. God is the only here. When you begin to live from this recognition, the old landscape of your life reshapes itself. Relationships take on new form. Your emotional body grows lighter. Your mind becomes clear and still. And most importantly, you begin to perceive the world through the eyes of spirit, knowing that behind every face, beneath every action, within every appearance, stands the same infinite life expressing itself. This is the kingdom. It is not a destination. It is not a place to arrive at someday. It is the awareness of God's allness, realized now. And so I invite you not to try, not to strive, but simply to rest. Rest in the truth that the burden you have carried was never yours to bear. Rest in the knowledge that forgiveness is not something you must perform. It is something that unfolds when the light of spiritual truth dissolves the shadows of the human story. Rest in the one presence, and let that presence do the work. As we close, I bless you with the awareness of your own divine identity. May you walk through your days with the quiet assurance that you are held in the infinite. May your heart remain open to the truth that nothing can oppose God, and therefore nothing can oppose the harmony of your being. May each moment of your life become an opportunity to behold the Christ within yourself, within those you love, and even within those who once seemed to stand against you. For where the Christ is recognized, the world is healed. Peace be unto you, beloved, not the peace of circumstances, but the peace of the one presence in whom all is well, all is whole, and all is God.